Who are you?
I'm the one.
As an actor, Academy Award winner Morgan Freeman has told some of the most gripping tales in cinema.
Let me tell you about a voice, the one that whispers.
Morgan Freeman, the timeless legend of Hollywood. For over 60 years, he has shown us what resilience, dignity, and honesty look like on screen. From the dusty back roads of Mississippi, he climbed all the way to winning Academy Awards, proving that greatness doesn't have an expiration date, that where you start doesn't matter, and that hard work and never giving up always pays off in the end. Just hearing his name is enough to bring back memories of that calm, soothing voice that helped us get through tough times and find hope again. The voice that comforted millions of people during their darkest moments, and the powerful presence that turned ordinary roles into timeless lessons about being human. But behind that shining mountain of success and fame lies a deep, dark valley that most people don't want to look at. 2 failed marriages filled with bitter arguments, a terrible car crash that almost killed him and left him with injuries that never fully healed, serious accusations that swirled around him, and painful failures in both business deals and movie projects, all leaving wounds and scars that have never completely closed up. Now at 88 years old, which scars still hurt and burn with pain? Which sorrows still hold on tight to him? Before we start, hit the like button as a way of saying thank you to the voice that has carried our hearts through life's toughest storms. It's heartbreaking to think that the man whose voice would someday bring comfort to the entire world started his own life experiencing hunger, loneliness, and being left behind. A small boy who was forced to survive and endure before he ever had the chance to dream about anything better. Morgan Freeman was born on June 1st, 1937 in Memphis, Tennessee, as the youngest of 5 children to his mother Edna and father Morgan Porterfield Freeman. His mother worked incredibly hard cleaning floors and helping nurses, while his father tried to keep a small barbershop running. But no matter how hard they worked, they barely had enough money to pay rent, let alone feed 5 hungry children. Poverty wasn't just something they dealt with. It was like a constant shadow following them everywhere they went. Freeman later remembered nights when he was so hungry he couldn't sleep, when the empty, painful feeling in his stomach hurt worse than anything else and felt heavier than the thin blanket on his bed. He grew up knowing that food wasn't always guaranteed, that safety was something fragile that could break at any moment, and that the world didn't promise anything good would happen. When his parents' work pulled them north to Chicago searching for better opportunities and jobs, young Morgan was left behind in Charleston, Mississippi, to be raised by his grandmother in her care. That old wooden house with its porch sagging under the hot southern sun became both his shelter and his prison at the same time. The boy would sit all alone on that creaky porch, listening to church choirs singing in the distance, wondering why his parents were so far away and why the world felt so cold and empty. A beat-up old suitcase became his closest companion as the family kept drifting and moving from Mississippi to Indiana to Illinois and back again, never staying in one place long enough for him to feel like he belonged anywhere or could call it home. Each move meant facing a new schoolyard, climbing new stairs, hearing new whispers behind his back, and each time he was the outsider, the poor kid, the one who had less than everyone else and everyone knew it. Freeman later thought back and said he knew exactly what it meant to be left behind, and that cruel, painful knowledge hardened into the quiet inner steel that would one day define his powerful presence. Growing up as a young black boy in the American South during the 1940s and 1950s was absolutely merciless and brutal. Segregation cut across every street corner and every school desk, marking him and branding him as less important before he ever had a chance to prove he was more than that. At school, the sting and pain of inequality hit him every single day, with books that were old and torn apart, classrooms that were falling apart and neglected, and the unspoken message hanging in the air that children who looked like him weren't expected to rise up or succeed at anything. The deep humiliation of walking past whites only signs carved deep wounds into his heart and soul, teaching him early and harshly about the terrible injustice of the world he lived in. He would later speak powerfully against such unfair limitations, saying that his history and his people's story couldn't be shoved into just a single month, because his very life itself was living proof of endurance and survival beyond any labels anyone tried to put on him. But even in that harsh and difficult soil where nothing good should grow, a tiny spark began to flicker and come alive. When he was 9 years old, he stood on a school stage for the very first time in his life. The play was small and modest. The audience was tiny. The applause was scattered and weak. But for him, standing there, it was like a revelation and an awakening. In that single powerful moment, under the dim glow of classroom lights, the terrible loneliness that had been crushing him finally cracked open just a little bit. He felt truly seen by others, if only for an instant. And that one instant became his lifeline and reason for survival. Acting wasn't just performing or pretending to be someone else for him. It was absolute proof that his presence in the world mattered, that his voice could cut through the heavy silence around him, that he had something valuable and real to give to the world. Freeman would later remember and recall that he told himself, even as a young child, that this is what I want. This is who I truly am, deep inside. That fragile, delicate spark of hope and purpose carried him through many long years of emptiness and terrible uncertainty, constantly whispering to him that even in the very darkest places, hope can be born and survive. But life wasn't finished testing him and putting him through trials yet. In 1961, when Freeman was only 24 years old, his father died from cirrhosis of the liver. For a son who had grown up spending half his childhood in his father's absence, the death was still a deep wound that cut straight to his core and center. It wasn't just the loss of a parent. It was the final, absolute confirmation that life could take away more than it would ever give back to you. He once described it as a silence that was deeper and more painful than hunger ever was. A silence that reminded him harshly that even family members could be taken away in an instant without warning. The hunger he experienced as a child, the loneliness of being left behind and forgotten, the humiliation and shame of segregation laws, and now the devastating loss of his father, were all scars and wounds that never fully healed or closed up. And yet somehow they didn't destroy him or break him completely. Instead, they forged him and shaped him into something stronger. Those deep wounds became the raw material and building blocks of his incredible strength. The quiet dignity and grace that would one day make audiences everywhere lean forward and pay close attention whenever he spoke. The deep humanity and understanding that would color and fill every single word of his narration and acting. The poor, hungry boy who had once known such hunger, silence, and exclusion slowly grew up and transformed into the man whose voice would go on to define entire generations of people. The hunger taught him gratitude and appreciation. The absence and loneliness taught him empathy and understanding of others' pain. The injustice and unfairness taught him resilience and the ability to keep going. The loss taught him clearly that life was fragile and breakable, and that being present and showing up mattered so much more than making empty promises. And from those forgotten, dusty roads of Mississippi, carved and shaped out of poverty, silence, and deep sorrow, emerged a true legend. Not in spite of all the pain he suffered, but because of it and through it. It's almost cruel and heartbreaking to realize that even after surviving such a difficult and painful childhood, the world still demanded even more suffering and struggle before it would grant Morgan Freeman any place to stand or any recognition. Barely out of high school with absolutely no money for college and no safety net to catch him if he fell, he sought shelter and refuge in the United States Air Force, hoping the military uniform would give him structure and order. For a little while, he dreamed big dreams of piloting fighter jets and soaring through the sky. But when he finally sat in the cockpit staring at all the complicated instruments and controls, a deep truth struck him hard and clear. This wasn't his destiny or his path in life. He later admitted openly that he realized he wasn't meant to kill other people, so he made the brave choice to walk away from stability and financial security and instead stepped boldly into complete uncertainty, trading the discipline and structure of the military for the chaos and unpredictability of chasing a dream that offered absolutely no guarantees of success. Los Angeles turned out to be absolutely merciless and brutal to him. Freeman enrolled at the Pasadena Playhouse to seriously study acting, but tuition fees were a heavy burden he could barely carry and afford. To survive and keep going, he worked at Los Angeles City College as a clerk, typing papers and documents during the day, and rehearsing his lines and scenes at night when he was already exhausted. His small paychecks vanished immediately into rent payments, scraps of cheap food, and train fare to get around the city. Some nights, his entire dinner was nothing more than stale hard bread and coffee so weak and watery it was little more than slightly tinted water. More than once he fell asleep sitting up in a hard wooden chair in his tiny rented room, with his hunger and empty stomach growling louder than any hope of sleep. He later reflected and said he knew hunger intimately. He knew exactly what it was like to live with absolutely nothing to your name. But rather than break him down or destroy his spirit, those hollow, empty nights forged and built a quiet resilience and inner strength that would become his signature and trademark. Rejection greeted and met him at every single turn and corner. Casting directors dismissed him before he even opened his mouth to speak, sometimes refusing to even meet his eyes or look at him directly. His skin color alone was often enough to end an audition before it could even begin or get started. The humiliation was sharp and cutting, echoing and reminding him of the segregated Mississippi he had worked so hard to leave behind. So he drifted and wandered between Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, always chasing and following the faint, weak promise of work and opportunity. In San Francisco, he danced in chorus lines, sweating under hot stage lights for scattered applause that barely paid his rent. In New York City, he stood in endless, long lines waiting for auditions, one after another, each no and rejection pressing down on his shoulders like a heavy stone getting heavier. There were dark nights when the idea of surrender and giving up whispered temptingly to him, but he silenced that voice with a solemn vow and promised to himself that he would starve to death if he must, but he would act no matter what.